Lena walked into the salvage yard early in the morning with grease still under her nails and quiet focus in her eyes. The workers noticed her right away because she was the only woman who came here alone and looked like she belonged. A long rusty container sat near the back with bent corners and old paint peeling like dry leaves. People called it useless and joked that even rain would not respect it anymore. Lena did not laugh or argue, and she only asked the owner for the price and the papers. The owner raised his eyebrows and tried to sound friendly while warning her it was a bad deal. Lena nodded once as if she already knew the risk, and still chose it with calm certainty. The yard men gathered closer like they were watching a show that would end fast. One said she should buy a small car instead because at least that could be fixed and sold. Another said the container looked like a tired animal that wanted to sleep forever. They laughed loudly and tried to make her feel small without saying it directly. Lena kept her face steady and counted her money slowly, as if their voices were only wind. Her hands were strong but gentle, and her posture showed she trusted her own skills more than their opinions. When the deal was done, she asked for delivery and gave the address of her workshop near the industrial strip. Lena's workshop was not fancy, but it was neat and it smelled like metal and clean oil. Tools hung on the wall in straight lines and every drawer had a label written in simple clear letters. Old engines sat on stands like quiet patients waiting for careful repair. Most people in town knew Lena as the mechanic who fixed what others gave up on. Some respected her talent in silence, but many still acted like she was doing a man's job by mistake. Lena never wasted energy trying to change their minds because she had learned that results speak louder. She closed the shop door that evening and spread her sketches across a table under a bright lamp. Her sketches were not random drawings and they were not dreams written with soft hope. They were measured plans with numbers and notes and careful steps for building something useful and strong. She traced lines with a pencil and checked angles with a ruler like she was reading a map to a hidden place. On a small page she had written one sentence to remind herself why she started this work. She had promised her younger self that no one would decide her limits again. Years ago she had been told to pick a safer path and stay quiet and accept small goals. Now she built her own path from scrap and steel and patience, and she enjoyed the sound of progress. The next morning a truck arrived carrying the container and the noise pulled neighbors to their windows. A few people walked over to watch and they tried to look casual while expecting her to fail. The driver lowered the container behind the shop and the metal groaned as it touched the ground. Dust rose and the container leaned slightly, and it looked worse close up than it did from far away. Someone whispered that she wasted her money, and another person shook his head with a smile. Lena thanked the driver and waited until the small crowd got bored and drifted back to their routines. Then she locked the gate and stood in front of the container like she was meeting an old challenge face to face. Inside the container the air was stale and the floor was rough and the corners held years of dirt. Lena opened both doors wide so sunlight poured in and showed every dent and scratch without hiding anything. She stepped inside slowly and listened to the way sound moved through the hollow space. To her it did not feel like trash, and it felt like a blank room waiting for a new story. She took chalk and marked the walls with lines where supports would go and where cutouts would be made. She measured twice and wrote notes in her notebook because she respected structure and safety more than speed. When she finished she stood still for a moment and smiled because the picture in her mind was already clear. By late afternoon sparks flashed as she began cutting away weak parts and removing damaged panels. The sound carried across the area and made people glance over with curiosity and doubt. Lena worked with steady rhythm and her movements showed experience built through long lonely practice. She did not rush and she did not panic when a bolt fought back or a hinge refused to move. She used heat when needed and leverage when needed and patience at all times. Metal pieces stacked neatly on one side and useful parts were saved and labeled for later. From the outside it looked like she was tearing the container apart, and that was exactly why people laughed again. When the sun dropped lower the container had holes and open sections and it looked like a broken shell. A man from a nearby shop walked over and asked what she was making in a teasing voice. Lena only said she was building something that would help more people than they expected. He smiled like he did not believe her, and he walked away shaking his head. Lena kept working until the light faded and her arms felt heavy, but her mind stayed sharp. Before closing the doors, she looked inside at the chalk lines and imagined walls rising and systems fitting perfectly. She locked up for the night, knowing that tomorrow the real shape would begin, and the laughter would start to change into silence. Morning light crept over the workshop as Lena unlocked the gate and stepped inside with calm focus. The container waited quietly, and it looked rough but honest in the soft early glow. She tied her hair back and checked her notes again because she believed preparation saved time. Her first goal was strength because beauty meant nothing without balance and safety. She marked new support points and began welding steel beams into the frame. Each spark felt like a promise, and each solid joint gave her more confidence. The container slowly stopped feeling weak and started feeling dependable. People nearby noticed the steady noise, and some paused longer than before. They expected chaos but saw a rhythm instead, and it confused them. Lena worked without music and listened only to the sound of metal and breath. She adjusted angles carefully and tested every joint before moving forward. A small mistake could ruin weeks of work, and she refused to rush. By midday the container stood straighter and the doors no longer sagged. What once leaned with defeat now stood with quiet strength. Inside the container, Lena cleared the floor and leveled it piece by piece. She laid down insulation she had saved from past projects and sealed it tightly. Her hands moved with memory learned through years of rebuilding broken things. She remembered cold nights when heat failed and comfort was a luxury. Those memories guided her choices more than any advice she was given. She designed the space to protect and support rather than impress. Every layer she added carried purpose and respect for future use. A neighbor named Mira stopped by and watched from the gate without speaking. Mira had seen Lena work before, but never on something this large. She asked gently what the container would become and waited patiently. Lena said it would be a place where broken machines could breathe again. Mira nodded slowly and said that sounded like Lena herself. They shared a quiet smile that needed no explanation. For the first time someone spoke without doubt or humor in their voice. As days passed, the container changed shape and attitude. Windows were cut with careful edges and reinforced with thick frames. Light poured in and chased away the darkness that once lived inside. Lena installed wiring she built herself and tested each line with care. She believed safety was respect and shortcuts were insults to the craft. Each evening she cleaned the space and left it ready for the next day. Order helped her think, and thinking kept her moving forward. The men who once laughed now slowed their steps when passing by. They did not say much, but their eyes stayed longer than before. Some tried to guess the purpose, and others pretended not to care. One said it looked better than expected, and another stayed silent. Lena heard none of it because her focus stayed inside the walls. She measured progress by structure, not by approval. Her confidence grew with every solid improvement she made. Inside the container she began building stations along the walls. Each station had a clear role and enough room to work freely. There was a space for engines, a space for tools, and a clean bench. She planned airflow so heat and noise would not trap her inside. Every decision was tested in her mind before being built by her hands. This was not guesswork, and it was not luck. It was experience shaped by years of being underestimated. Late one evening Lena sat on a crate and looked around in silence. The container no longer felt like scrap, and it felt alive with intention. She imagined people walking in and seeing possibility instead of rust. She imagined silence replacing laughter and curiosity replacing doubt. Her hands ached, but her heart felt steady and strong. Tomorrow she would begin the most visible changes yet. And she knew once those began there would be no turning back. The third week began with rain tapping softly against the metal roof. Lena welcomed the sound because it tested what she had already built. She walked inside the container and listened for leaks and weak spots. Everything held firm and the air stayed warm and dry. That small success gave her quiet satisfaction. She tightened her gloves and moved to the next phase. Now it was time to give the structure a clear purpose. She brought in machines she had restored over many years. Each one carried a story of patience and careful repair. An old press that once shook now ran smooth and calm. A cutting table that had been bent now stood level and strong. She placed them exactly where her plans showed they belonged. The space began to feel like a real workshop rather than a shell. Even the container walls seemed to settle into their new role. People passing by slowed more often now, and some stopped completely. They noticed lights inside and organized tools and clean lines. The laughter that once followed Lena had faded into quiet watching. A few whispered guesses, but none felt sure enough to say them out loud. Lena stayed focused and treated each task with the same respect. She believed consistency built trust even when no one admitted it. Her work spoke in steel and structure instead of words. One afternoon a delivery arrived with panels and equipment. The driver looked surprised and asked if this was the same container. Lena smiled and nodded without explaining further. She helped unload and moved each item inside with careful planning. The container no longer echoed like an empty box. It absorbed sound and held warmth like a proper building. Even the smell had changed from rust to clean metal and oil. Mira returned again, and this time she stepped inside. She looked around slowly, and her eyes widened with honest amazement. She said it felt different, like a place built with intention. Lena thanked her and offered a stool to sit on. They talked about work and quiet dreams and the value of patience. Mira said people were starting to talk in a new way. Not jokes but curiosity and respect. As the days passed, Lena added finishing touches. She painted the walls a light color to reflect brightness and clarity. She installed shelves and labeled everything clearly. Nothing was hidden and nothing was wasted. She tested airflow and noise and adjusted where needed. The container felt ready to welcome real work and real people. It no longer felt like something borrowed from a yard. One evening a small group gathered near the gate again. This time no one laughed and no one mocked. They watched as Lena rolled open the doors. Light spilled out, revealing order and purpose. A man who once joked about firewood stood silent. Another nodded slowly, like he was seeing her for the first time. Lena noticed none of it and continued tightening a final bolt. Inside she paused and looked around at what now existed. This was more than a workshop and more than a rebuild. It was proof that vision mattered even when no one believed it. She remembered every doubt thrown her way and felt no anger. Only a calm certainty that she had chosen the right path. Tomorrow she would open the doors fully. And the container would finally show the world what it had become. The morning Lena chose to open the doors fully arrived calm and bright. She stood outside the container and breathed in the quiet air. Her hands rested on the metal doors that once felt weak and tired. Now they felt solid and dependable under her grip. She remembered the laughter and the looks from the first day. Those memories no longer carried weight or pain. They felt distant, like noise from another life. She pulled the doors open wide and sunlight flooded the space. The clean walls reflected the light and filled the container with warmth. Tools lined the sides and machines waited quietly in their places. Everything looked ready and balanced and alive. Lena stepped back and let the space speak for itself. She did not add signs or explanations or excuses. She trusted the work to tell its own story. People began to arrive slowly at first and then in small groups. Some came out of curiosity and others out of disbelief. They stood at the entrance, unsure of what to say. This was not what they expected from a rusty container. They saw order where they expected mess. They saw care where they expected shortcuts. Silence replaced laughter, and it stayed that way. A man who owned a nearby repair shop stepped inside carefully. He looked around and touched the workbench with respect. He asked simple questions about airflow and layout. Lena answered clearly without pride or hesitation. She explained how each choice solved a real problem. He nodded and admitted he had never seen space used this well. His words carried surprise and something close to admiration. More people followed, and the container filled with quiet voices. Some asked about the machines and others asked about the process. Lena answered when asked and stayed quiet when not. She never spoke about doubt or judgment or being underestimated. She spoke only about work and planning and patience. That honesty made people listen more closely. They realized this was not luck and not a stunt. Mira stood near the back watching faces change one by one. She saw curiosity turn into respect without a single argument. She smiled because she knew how hard this moment was earned. A young mechanic asked Lena if she could learn here. Lena looked at her hands and then at the space. She said learning was welcome where effort was real. The words carried weight and kindness together. The container now felt like a meeting place rather than a project. People shared ideas and asked for advice and offered help. Lena guided conversations back to practical solutions. She believed good work came from shared understanding. Someone suggested partnerships and others mentioned future plans. Lena listened but made no promises yet. She wanted growth to stay steady and meaningful. As the day moved on, the story spread beyond the yard. People who once laughed now told others about what they saw. They described the container with surprise and respect. They said it did not feel small or temporary. They said it felt stronger than many proper buildings. Lena did not hear most of it and did not need to. Her satisfaction came from standing inside her work. That evening when the crowd faded, Lena closed the doors gently. The space inside held warmth and quiet purpose. She sat on a stool and looked around without rushing. This moment was not an ending and not a victory parade. It was a turning point shaped by effort and belief. Tomorrow work would continue in new ways. And the container would begin changing lives, not just minds. The weeks that followed changed the rhythm of the industrial strip. The container no longer stood as a quiet project behind a locked gate. Its doors opened each morning and closed each evening with purpose. Machines inside worked steadily and the sound carried confidence. People came not to watch but to learn and repair and build. Lena moved through the space with calm control and steady focus. Her vision had become something real and shared. Work began arriving from nearby shops and small businesses. Broken machines that others refused were brought to the container. Lena inspected each one carefully and explained what could be done. She never promised miracles and never accepted careless work. Those who watched saw honesty instead of show. Repairs left the space stronger than before. Trust grew with every completed job. Young mechanics began spending time there after their own shifts. They asked questions and listened closely and practiced patiently. Lena taught them by example rather than long speeches. She showed how to respect tools and materials and time. Mistakes were corrected without shame and effort was always praised. The container became a place of learning through doing. Confidence grew quietly in everyone who entered. Mira helped organize schedules and managed simple planning tasks. She said the space felt like a heartbeat for the area. People who once worked alone now shared ideas freely. The container connected skills and stories and solutions. Neighbors noticed the change in atmosphere and energy. The laughter from before was gone, replaced by cooperation. Something solid had taken root. One afternoon the salvage yard owner returned to visit. He walked slowly through the container and looked around carefully. He remembered the day he sold it without much thought. Now he saw clean lines, strong systems, and focused work. He admitted he had been wrong and said it plainly. Lena thanked him without holding the past against him. She believed growth mattered more than regret. As word spread beyond the area, new opportunities appeared. Requests came from farther towns and different trades. Lena chose carefully and kept the work honest and manageable. She refused to let speed replace quality or pressure replace care. The container stayed true to its purpose. It was never about size or attention. It was about building something that lasted. One evening Lena stayed late after everyone had gone. She sat quietly and listened to the soft hum of cooling machines. She thought about the first day and the laughter she heard. Those sounds no longer mattered or held power. They had been replaced by proof and respect. She felt pride without noise or display. Just calm satisfaction earned through effort. The container stood strong under the night sky. Once dismissed, it now held value beyond its metal walls. It changed how people saw work and possibility. It showed that vision paired with patience could reshape anything. Lena locked the doors and looked back one last time. She knew this was only the beginning. Because what she built would keep building long after her hands rested.